I must say it's a great pleasure to be here this morning and to discuss this emerging issue around cybersecurity. I think over the years we've been working very hard to get together a forum for this. I'm really appreciative of the effort by the team that has put this together. So I'll be talking today about the issue of cooperation, the challenges of operational cooperation and threat intelligence sharing in Africa. By name, my name is William Makatiani. I run a company called Serianu Limited. We do practice in a number of countries across Africa. And our main focus really is on monitoring. We do quite a number of reports that you might have heard of, the Africa Cybersecurity Report. And we also do a lot of research around cybersecurity. In terms of, again, our main goal in terms of where we're headed, it's really looking at Africa and understanding what, why, and how. We run a training center in Nairobi, a research center where we work with students. And part of it is to look at trends, understand what's going on, engage, educate, and empower so that we are able to get future cybersecurity leaders from the continent. As I mentioned today, I'll be talking about cooperation. And one of the biggest challenges with cooperation is understanding, why do we need to cooperate? Why do we need to share things? Cybercrime is one of the greatest risks to prosperity. When you think about the digital world or 4IR, the fourth industrial revolution, it's very important we look at cyber risk because it can easily wipe all the benefits. Think about it. If you have somebody who throws you ransomware attack, and even themselves, they lose the decryption keys, it becomes a very difficult problem to do that. And also, cybercrime knows no border. You have attackers now that are coming from all these other countries targeting you. We have attackers that are coming from Kenya, targeting West Africa, or West Africa, targeting East Africa, South Africa, Europe, all these places. So it becomes very critical for us to look at it and ask ourselves, how would you respond if there is an attack from a different country, or even within the countries, within each of these countries? If you're in the banking sector and you get targeted, it's important for you to be able to cooperate with the law enforcement agencies, to work with your peers, and appreciate how to address that. So when you think about cooperation, there are three types of cooperations that we look at. First one is company to company or corporation to corporation. There's cooperation to law enforcement, and then there's law enforcement to law enforcement. And the whole idea here is someone is holding information that might help the other in either preventing or detecting an attack on the environment. As you think about cooperation, what are some of the key considerations when you think about collaboration? What is this that drives the need for collaboration? The first one is cybercrime, like any other crime, can only be investigated and prosecuted by law enforcement agencies. And as a critical part, law enforcement agencies do not have the technical skills, or rather all the technical capabilities if you compare them to private sector. To add to that, many attackers target multiple organizations, leading to multiple indicators. So when you think about it, if you are targeted today as an organization, there's a high likelihood that your peers have also been targeted. So collaboration helps you then to be able to pick that information and respond within reasonable timelines. Cyber attacks are also now carried out by highly sophisticated and global groups, and there is no single cybersecurity expert that can go out and pick those things. If you think about the cybersecurity vendors globally, they're all releasing different reports. When you look at those reports, there are some similarities, but there's something unique from the different vendors that we are seeing. And it's important that we collaborate. The very last point on this, again, is every jurisdiction has different legislation and laws related to cybercrime. There are some countries in Africa where they don't have a legislation related to cybercrime. So if you go in and you say, someone tampered with my systems from your country, that they don't know what to do. So it's important for us to have collaboration so that we can be able to appreciate some of these challenges. What are the benefits of cooperation? It enhances the timeline of incident response and investigation. You all know of Interpol, and even yesterday there was a session on Interpol. And the role Interpol plays in this whole process, again, is really trying to understand how then do we understand what's happening in different countries, and how do we help these countries to work together to address these issues. The second one is reduces the cost of detecting and preventing data breaches. If you're an industry and you share intelligence and you cooperate, if somebody warns you of an attack that is coming your way, then it's far much easier and cheaper for you to respond. It also improves the effectiveness of incident response plan. Most of us have all these incident response plans that we've never tested. When you're given something to try out and you know that something happened in a different organization that might be similar to yours, you're able to test your capabilities. You're able to go in and appreciate some of what the capabilities you have to build. So let's now look at some of the challenges we see in Africa when it comes to cooperation and threat intelligence. The first one is legal and privacy challenges. Majority of the organizations or other countries in Africa have all these laws and rules that don't make sense in the sense of what they're looking for. And the bigger challenge is the harmonization. You'll even get countries within West Africa or within East Africa who are neighbors and part of their regional groupings, but they don't have similar laws. So you cannot walk from one country to the other and arrest a cyber criminal. The next one is lack of technical skills and know-how. And this is a bigger problem. Most of us have a firewall on our networks. Most of us have access to a lot of information on our networks. But unfortunately, we cannot be able to go in and pick information that will help somebody else. If you have a brute force attack, there are indicators of attack. It could be the IP address, it could be the URL, it could be the malware. We do not have the technical skills or the know-how to go out and pick that. Lack of shared standards around evidence collection. Without standards that allow us to collect evidence the same process across the different countries, it becomes very difficult for you to look at evidence and say it makes sense or not. Fear of losing competitive advantage. When it comes to issues of competitive advantage, some people look at cyber intelligence as a competitive advantage. Unfortunately, it's not. If at all there is crime, it's important for us to look at it as crime and we address it to be able to fix the problem. What is the way forward in terms of some of these things? The first thing as a continent is we need to look at our technical skills and capabilities. Cybercrime is here and is not going anywhere. There are 4 steps that are very critical. The first one is visibility. If individual organizations or states or countries cannot be able to go out and understand what's happening in the environment, it's almost impossible for you to pick out if something happens. The second one is detection. Have visibility of what you can be able to understand, which means preparedness. Have the ability to detect these incidents. Have the ability to deter and to attribute. Attribution helps because then you know who's doing it, and then the intel is easier to apply. Deterrence is critical because with the right laws and the right controls, you deter criminals. And that is a form that allows collaboration in terms of intelligence sharing. The very last 2 capabilities we need to look at is streamlining regulatory and privacy laws across the continent. And the very final one is developing shared investigative standards so that when you share intelligence, that intelligence is understood and is applicable across the region.
Thanks, William. I mean, it's very interesting. You're talking about cooperation now and collaboration across Africa. And you said very well that the issue of collaboration becomes a problem because we have a lot of legislation that cut across, but the problem is that we don't have a unifying legislation across Africa. And I think just to hold on to that, I remember the African Union, for example, had passed the so-called Africa Data Protection, regulation, the African Union Convention. But as you say, most countries have not even ratified. Some of them have not even implemented. Some countries do not even have data protection laws. I think Kenya just signed its own data protection bill by the president. Now the question comes in, how do we ensure that sense of collaboration and ensure the laws are quite cutting close? There's also the issue of language differences. Yes. Do you think maybe that's also something that maybe is an issue across us getting a clear-cut regulation because also language differences?
So of course, yes. So the culture does play a role, but what I've seen with the AU, they've done a good job in terms of finding people who can be able to translate. So we have a lot of multilingual capabilities across even Africa Union or even some of the regional. If you think about the Southern African region, you have Portuguese, you have English, and sometimes when you go for those meetings, people are able to coordinate things. So yes, cultural and language could be a barrier that does again affect the issue of collaboration, but more so culture than language.
So you believe that at this point, the language also is an issue, but there's an issue as well and you just brought it up, the issue of competence. So maybe the next question will be, what exactly can we be able to do as cybersecurity, I wish the other panelists were able to also join in this conversation. What exactly can we be able to do? I know you're doing a lot of work in, skills development. I think you're also doing a lot of work with the universities as well. I've seen you doing a lot of work also with the high schools. But the question comes in now, how do we ensure that this workforce also we are training also has the right skills and capabilities to be able to also join the workforce in a way that is also, how do we also create that better framework for them, where even them, they also contribute towards the research? Because threat intelligence, there's a session coming up where we're saying, how do we move away from so-called threat intelligence to intelligence? There's an interesting conversation. So the question is, how do we ensure that when we bring, the new generation of cybersecurity professionals as well, how do we ensure we also equip them with the necessary skills, more so with regard to research, to also feed this, information sharing and knowledge transfer across Africa? Go back to you.
So I think the challenge we have in Africa is we tend to connect a lot of methodologies or frameworks from our peers in Asia and in Europe or even in the US. We need to look at our problems. We need to look at our problems uniquely and understand issues of cybercrime, issues of cybersecurity. When you think about a financial services establishment in Africa, you're looking at rural setting, you're looking at very poor processes, and therefore we need to build our own frameworks, because if you build a localized framework, it's far much easier. But when you get all these multinational organizations bringing framework, we adopt a lot of things that don't work. And I'll give you a very good example. When you think about the use of mobile money in Africa, it is growing very well because it's something that was built here locally. And part of that is because it started by we started by us using what is local and then use global standards to perfect it. Our approach to cybersecurity as is right now is very technical, or rather technology driven. And we now need to go back to the processes. How do people respond? When I get my phone and I get a fake message, how do I respond? And how do you go about it? So when you think about that, if we are able to address those peculiarities that are local, and then we pick the best from the other countries, it's far much easier than to go in and find out how do you build local. And then we train our students using that curriculum. Right now, most of our students are learning things that they will never apply, because what is in the market is very different from what they're being taught. So you have a huge gap. As I mentioned to you, we run a SOC. One of the biggest challenges is getting a student from university to come in and understand how a SOC works, because they've never interacted with an organization. So those are the challenges we have. Localize the frameworks, localize the curriculums, prepare the students, let's go into an environment knowing what is expected, as opposed to going into an environment and preaching what's happening in Europe or in the US when the environment is different.
Yeah, so I think I fully agree with you. So there's that gap between, the students coming into the workforce and what exactly, is reality in the field. That's what you're saying. Yes. So I wish the other speakers were with us today, but I'm just looking at it, there's a question, for example, here. There was the area that was to be covered by one of the speakers is the issue of the evolving threat landscape. It lies or covers in the whole approach to global aspect of cybercrime, because our focus in Africa. What are some of the threat vectors that we are seeing from your side in a daily task that are quite intriguing? Because we're sure that a lot of attacks are coming on. The attackers are getting smarter. They are having more sophisticated tools now. But I just let you maybe, what exactly do you see in your environment with regards to this sense of threat landscape?
So we've started seeing local malware. We've started seeing malware written in local dialects. We've seen malware we've actually seen malware written in Swahili. And that is a very interesting problem, because most of the antiviruses will not pick it. We've even seen malware written in African French. We've seen some of these attack tools that were leaked by the US, some of the Americans who leaked some tools. We've seen them now modified. We're now seeing PowerShell tools that are being used to go into this environment. We've seen dongles, very, very interesting dongles that have been modified, plugged into computers. So we are seeing localization of weapons. And in some of these cases, the challenge becomes then, who is looking for these things so that they warn everyone else? Because if you're waiting for us to get threat intel from, I'll mention some names of organizations that provide, be it Fortinet, be it Symantec. If you're waiting for threat intel from some of these organizations, for sure it will take time to pick this, because we are just a smaller part of what they look at in terms of global perspective. So if you look at some of the tools we are seeing, they are very unique. And then Africa, we see a lot of insider attacks, which means somebody knows what they're doing. Some of the systems we are seeing are locally developed. So when you look at some of the attack vectors, they're very unique to those systems across. Some of the mobile attacks, APIs are being targeted, and it's somebody who goes into the vendor who manages the integration and then inserts some type of scripts or queries. And those are very unique to the African landscape. Even the ATM attacks that we saw towards the end of the last year, spreading from Ghana all the way to Uganda, what you saw again is a modified. It's a globally known malware, but if you plug that malware into VirusTotal, it has never been detected. But if you look at it, it's something that was picked from Mexico or picked from Asia. So there are those changes where people are changing things they're doing. We are also now seeing some remote access servers where somebody goes to Amazon or Microsoft Azure, they build a cloud system, and using that cloud system, they build a remote access tool they deploy there, which helps them to connect. And it's not part of the global threat landscape, which means if we know it, if we don't share it with you, no one else will share it with you. Or if you find it and you don't share, then you do have a challenge in terms of figuring out where it's coming from.
I fully agree with you, William. Being in the space, of course, we all play in the same space. I remember there's a case, for example, you talked about a very, what hits the nerve. I can see you hit the nerve or the nail on the head. The issue of insider threat. They say know your enemy. The enemy from within is the one that kill you. In the sense that this is a person, is maybe a database administrator. He has been given the rights and controls to be able to do his daily jobs. Then this is the person who ends up becoming the malicious threat within the organization. Then I think that's now it becomes so tough when the threat has now evolved and insider threats now become a very, very huge challenge. Why is it that there's no innovation coming out of Africa? While for sure, in this case, we are seeing people now writing malware in Swahili. Maybe it is time to what exactly, maybe I pass the floor to you. What exactly is happening? Why is there no African innovation?
When you think about innovation, so Africans are very innovative. And I think that's one thing. When you spend time in Africa and you meet people from Botswana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, there's quite a lot of innovation. One of the challenges we face is we lack an innovation ecosystem, because when you think about an innovation, when you define an innovation, you can only define an innovation when it's accepted by the market and it is working within the market. We don't have ecosystems that can link academia to industry, because innovation, for it to work, you need somebody who is consistently improving what you're doing and somebody who's looking at the commercial aspects. We've had a few organizations that have come up with some tools. We had an antivirus company, if you remember, Bunifu, that came up with a very good antivirus that was working very well. I've seen in Ethiopia a company that had built a very good scanning tool. We've also seen in Nigeria a company that also had come up with a very good vulnerability tool that they actually developed on their own. The challenge in Africa, as I said, is, first of all, most of our innovations don't look at the long term. Most of these guys are not well funded. And then on the commercial side, most organizations will not pick this innovation and adopt it without actually going ahead and asking too many questions. We prefer things that are working. So the innovation culture is not working very well. Now, the other bigger part that is a bigger problem than anything is the way deals work in Africa. The best innovators right now are working in government. But when you come with the innovation and you say, okay, this is something I'm working on, while these guys have been there long enough and know what's supposed to work, they do have other interests. And they'll never let that deal go through because it will waste their time in terms of addressing. So we end up blocking entrepreneurship because of tenderpreneurs. If we got most of these people out into industry, people who've been in government or some of these organizations for almost 20 years, to work with some of these innovations, they know the solutions. So we need to get them out of this place to come work with the innovators. So it's a combination of the lack of ecosystem, lack of support, and this tenderpreneur business where somebody looks at a tender as an end and they don't look at the long term, what their kids will get. If you look at countries like Israel, they are very keen to see how your solution will fit into the long-term process. We are seeing similar work in Rwanda. So it's a combination of issues that are limiting our ability to innovate. But we do have innovative people. We do have very good ideas on the ground. The challenge is bringing those ideas to market and supporting them so that they can successfully show up in some of these organizations.
But bringing to that question you say, but the question will come in is that, do we believe enough also in African innovation? Because today, somebody realized that yes, the antivirus was developed by Serianu. Is the African government or African governments or African environments also open to African innovation? Maybe that's another thing. What exactly? First of all, there's an issue of the environment, also being run, of course, by entrepreneurs who their goal is not about creating, maybe it's about, a tender to an end to make the money and not maybe to the need for us to fight cybercrime. But the question will be, is Africa itself ready to support its own innovation? I believe you said, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, no, continue.
So my question will be, yes, we have, let's say, Ubunifu. And again, maybe we need to ask ourselves, maybe is it also an issue of also mediocrity in African innovation architecture or ecosystem? Or what exactly lying in the sense that we also not believe in our own innovations coming out of Africa? Maybe that will be an interesting conversation to ask. Why?
So in terms of quality, and I'm glad you mentioned that, without academia, if academia is not involved in an innovation, it's almost impossible, because you as the person going to market, you don't have enough time to do research and compare things. And therefore that issue of ecosystems comes a very critical. And that's why if you look at some of these bigger players across the world, the IBM, they spend so much money on R&D than even on the sales, because they're trying to build things that will be there for 5 to 10. So I would say we don't allocate enough money. We're just excited to say we have something we can sell to you. But in terms of building, that longevity is not there. And that goes back to academia. Academia has to find ways of fixing themselves into the environment. But we are getting away with this by copying frameworks. If you look at some of the books that are used in the universities, some of those books were used in the 80s. They worked in the US. But if you look at an American or European university, they've updated their books. They're even now using some papers from IEEE. They're using papers from SANS. They're using papers from all these places. Meanwhile, we're using books, Java books or other security books from 1990. So it's a combination, and I do agree with you, there are certain levels of mediocrity in these systems, or rather in this development, but some of these players actually know what they're doing.
So if I summarize your conversation or what we've just discussed, is that there's that sense that we need to, for sure, first of all, of course, ensure that the academia is involved. That's number one.
Yes.
And it has to be world-class, because if you're going to compete against the best, then we have to be the best. Otherwise, we can't compete. We all agree that. So I think the sense of excellence has to come in, but also academia, we need to also invest more money in research and development. Yes. So we fully agree with that. Fine. Just told you, let me go to the next, because some of us, it seems our speakers are not going to join us. I think we're going to take the next minutes ourselves. My next question was a topic to be covered as well by one of the speakers, which is a question of the global impact of cybercrime. I mean, I know you've done a lot of reports, and latest study by Bromium puts cyber threat or illegal cyber economy to a $1.5 trillion business. That's the legal side of it. I mean, you and I in the other, in the legal side, which is not even equivalent to that. We don't make that much. Now the question is, illegal cyber criminals, their economy is $1.5 trillion, which is almost equivalent to the economy of Russia. We're talking about the 13th largest economy in the world. I mean, William, the question is, how big is the impact of cybercrime to the global economy? Back to you.
No, so I think the impact is big because there's so much happening. And if you look at the GDPR, so what the EU has done, they've set up a monitoring site that just shows you some of the records that are stolen on a daily basis. If you look at the amount of data that is stolen on a daily basis, it is huge. If you think about fraud, you think about IP theft, you think about sabotage, you think about the DDoS. I think, was it just last week that one of the global vendors was saying that they stopped a huge DDoS because it is profitable. If you come to Africa alone, business email compromise on its own within the African context, we are looking at losses of almost $500 million. So when you think about the ability to defraud masses, and we're talking about ignorant masses, like a pyramid scheme, a lot of these people don't know what it is expected of them. They're excited to have technology, and we're losing a lot of money and effort. Now, the other part of this, of course, is when you go out and you buy a firewall because you're worried about a cybercrime, of course, that is an expenditure. And you're losing, as an economy, we're losing money. Now, what worries me the most is when you have nation states releasing tools into the wild, and then you have all these insider threats, all these individual cyber criminals picking them and trying them out on vulnerable or a small financial services in Malawi, organization in Malawi, or in a small financial in rural Uganda. It becomes even bigger from an African perspective because they cannot match the capabilities and the resources that some of these individuals have. And when you get these tools, they won't even understand. There's a fraud we were dealing with sometime, I'd say 3 months ago. And what was very interesting about this fraud is somebody came in with PowerShell. They came in, they were able to go into the database, they moved money, the money went out through ATM. When the board of directors met, they fired the IT manager and told the IT manager, you did not do your work. And we were saying, no, the IT manager could not have stopped this thing because the budget you have, the firewall you have is not updated. It's been there for almost 7 years. So when you look at the cost of cybercrime, the supply and the demand side, and you put Africa in that context, I think it is a huge impact. And I don't think we've seen the end of this from the perspective of what is the worst that could happen.
So we all agree that this is a big challenge. And in this case, of course, I will bring it back home to maybe our listeners home in Kenya, for example, where there's been quite a lot of incidents. I mean, the banks for sure have been, for example, quite, victims. And it's quite unfortunate, we hear of incidents every day. Now, the question would be that, and somebody has asked a question, and I'm tying it back to what we started from the beginning. Remember the issue of collaboration. Now, somebody is asking a question. I think it came from Josephine Ajuoga. I think you can see the question yourself, but I want to convert the question more in a discussion as we close, as we almost end our session, is that the issue of reporting. For example, there are some organizations who will not be willing to report certain incidents for the fear of losing their reputation or using their clients. Now, the question comes in, yes, fine. Do we need maybe to build a clear framework on reporting or cybercrime or cyber incident, so that also the client who you and I serve also do not feel disenfranchised? There's that clear framework. You remember there was one bank, of course, without mentioning names, where when the information leaked out, there was an issue. Everybody went to withdraw the money from the bank. You remember such an incident. So the question will come in, fine, we would like to share intelligence, but there's some people who are asking, fine, we would like to share, but the fear is we might lose our clients and we might also lose our reputation. Hold on to that thought. That's the issue. That's number one. Now, number two comes in. Should we ensure that our legislation now says that if a company does not comply or put in framework some of these rules, there's a fine to it, like what is happening in the EU GDPR? We're talking about 4% of the bill. What do you think on those lines?
Repeat the last statement, sorry. So back to that. Now, even as we continue, I want to acknowledge a few organizations that are doing some very good work. If you think about, for example, SATKE, they're doing some good work, I think, in Kenya. I also know SAT Uganda is doing some good work. But what you've seen again, SATKE do is they've been able to work with quite a number of the local enforcement agencies and be able to provide some good intelligence that addresses that. Back to your question, the reporting challenge. The problem with intelligence sometimes is we want to give everything. For example, if I run a financial institution and I get compromised today, I don't have to tell you how much money I lost. I don't have to tell you all I need to tell you is this is how they did it. And what that means is, did they come from a non-IP address? Did they steal accounts? Did they bring a dongle? Did they use PowerShell? Did they deploy malware? And therefore, it goes back to what I mentioned, the ability for us to look at the visibility, detect, and understand what it is. It's only when you don't have the data to share that you struggle on what to share. But in all these investigations we've seen, you will always find an indicator of compromise. They came through remote access. It was TeamViewer. It was AnyDesk. They put some tool on the phone, on some computer. So the challenge, again, it goes back to technical expertise. Any good investigator who's gone through a fraud, you can find indicators of compromise that you can share without compromising the capability. The other part of reputation is a big problem for sure. Nobody wants to be associated with bad news. And Africans, unfortunately, we don't like bad news. If someone tells you today, my brother has died, whether you know them or not, you start fearing. You get what I mean? We fear bad news, which is a normal thing. So yes, it's a reputation problem. And we now need to figure out within the sectors, how do you keep this information, but you are able to share with everyone else? Now, journalists, when they get this information, they go all out, but they don't know what they're reporting. So when I talk about reporting, it's a question of reporting within a circle that appreciates what you're doing and can help each other, rather than going to the media and telling the media that we lost money or that detail. Now, eventually, we'll have to get to a point where you disclose this information, because attackers know the weaknesses. We are moving to the cloud. We are getting multi-tenancy where when bank A is hosted here, it's also hosted at bank B. So eventually we'll have to open this. And we are seeing that in Mauritius, where now you have to report your issues. We are seeing countries where they're setting data commissioners, and you'll see a lot of that. So, I mean, I think there's a comment here that talks about there's somebody who went to school and studied Java, but when they got out, they realized they needed to learn Python. And that is a typical sense. When you get out in the real world, and I'll be very honest, I was fortunate. Somebody helped me. I got a good internship and I was able to get into this one. What you learn in schools here, you face a challenge. And students who do internship earlier on are a better place to go out and understand that. There's a question from Judy Muriuki. Do you think there should be legal consequences for failing being a certain caliber of company without a certain level of security? Of course, yes. In the US, the New York Stock Exchange, we are now seeing them coming up with a reporting format for listed companies. And simply what they're saying is, if you're a listed company and you have shareholders, it's important for you to notify us of your cybersecurity status. Because if I invest in a company and you get hacked and you lose certain money, you're taking away some of my value as a shareholder. So yes, in the long run, I think you'll have companies required to provide a statement. The same way you provide a statement on your balance sheet or profit and loss, you have to provide an exposure statement and explain what you're doing to address the risks. Is it cyber insurance or what controls you've put in place? Do they report these breaches? From Irene or Mary? Reporting is a tricky issue. So I don't think you'll see a lot of reporting yet unless it's fully enforced. So that's something that will take a while.
I think we are also almost end of our time. Unfortunately, the other two speakers are not able to join us. I think they could have brought to us the angle, the two speakers is Mapixo from Nigeria. It could have been interesting to see or to understand, the threat landscape. I mean, Nigeria, for example, business email compromise is a huge, the Yahoo Boys, for example, is a big issue. And I mean, if you watch, for example, the session with Interpol, for example, where, they are now looking, how do you also ensure the law enforcement are also well empowered and capable to deal with the threat? Because we have realized, the end of the day, I think that's also the heartbeat of the forum, is that we need now to have a concerted stakeholders conversation. We need to now come together and say, look, maybe my question to you, is it not now the moment maybe to establish a regional security operations center in some regions? Just like what we have regional stock exchange market. The problem as Africans is that we always have small, like you come to the Kenyan stock exchange, it's a small player. Rwanda has a stock exchange, it's not doing that well. Kenya is still not doing that well. But the question comes in, is it now time to have regionalization of maybe cybersecurity governance in Africa? Maybe we close with that, and I think our time will be up for the next session. So what do you think of the regionalization aspect, or can we be able now to have more concerted effort of the stakeholders, even in terms of threat intelligence, which we've talked about in the beginning?
So I don't think we have an option. It's not even an option. It's a question of when. When you think about right now, so there are a lot of organizations that were buying services from partners from US, from Europe, for cybersecurity. Over the past 3 months, they've not been able to get resources here from any of those countries. And so now they're looking locally and asking, what can we do? I think we now need to look back at our issues. And I think part of it has been because of taxes and trade. And I like what the AU is doing in terms of passport, in terms of releasing all these taxes so that you can have a free trade arrangement across the region. There is no reason why we can look at Nigeria to building very good incident response capabilities. We look at Kenya building monitoring. We look at Botswana, Uganda building things around forensics or vulnerability assessment. If you think about Europe, if you look at France, you look at Sweden, there are capabilities they buy from each other, and it is working very well. So we have no option. COVID pandemic has taught us one thing. If you're not self-reliant, you will have problems. If you're not able to go out and address issues, you have no chance of surviving. So I think it's a matter of when and how. The challenge is we need to put this in a language that our dear leaders will appreciate and understand. But this is the right time for cybersecurity experts. It's not a market that is not an industry that is going down, it's going up. We need younger people to appreciate these problems because only they can build tools. With cloud, we can build solutions. We don't need to look for bigger solutions. Data analytics, you can now go to the cloud, look at your scenarios, build it. We are moving away from heavy technologies to simple technologies and problems. So I think we have an opportunity as a continent. The challenge is, can we actually tap into it and do something? And that is what we spend our time doing it. And I'm glad as Africa Cyber Defense Forum, it's something we're addressing.
Yeah. Now, thank you, William. And I think this brings us almost to, I think we have just a few minutes to close. But I think it's very clear from our conversation that the question, just to summarize some of the things you talked about, you and I, is that when it comes to threat intelligence sharing, there's the issue of regulation. We need to harmonize some of the regulations to enable the different stakeholders to be playing. Second, we also need to empower the ecosystem to also, more innovations can come in. But there's one thing in closing our session, it is time for Africa to look inward. So I hope if everybody is watching, everybody in the audience, our conversation ends with one word. COVID-19 has taught us we must look inwards in Africa, with regards to fighting cybercrime. We must now look inwards. Even as much as we depend on foreign technology, foreign expertise, time to look inwards. And I hope our leaders, as you say, the legal policy and whatever framework were there, can they now empower the legal capabilities? Let's empower the Serianos, the Enovise, and the different other companies that are there. Can we now empower these local companies to be able to also compete in the global arena? I think that's the best way. And unless you have a last word, I just want to pass you maybe 1 minute to say your last word, and we'll pass on to the next issue.
No, I must say, I'm really, really impressed. I think if we continue with this type of forum, we'll be able to pick up. The challenge with Africa is we don't listen to each other. We don't spend time to listen to what somebody else is saying. And the sooner we do that, the better it is for us. I go to some of these countries, I'll say even Botswana, Nigeria, and you listen and you feel the connection. The question is moving into the next level, and I'm glad this type of forum is helping us get there. But we need more of us pushing that message because we have no option. The challenge we face today, our grandkids, our future generations will not have jobs. And we cannot keep blaming the colonialists for some of these problems. We have a chance to do something. Why not do it? Thank you very much, Gilbert.
William, thank you so much, William. To our audience, thank you so much. And thank you for showing up. Unfortunately, 2 of our speakers will not show up, but it's fine. I hope they'll make it in the next session. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day, William.